Hi, I'm Roy. I have a story about my absolute worst roommate ever. His name is Carlos. Then I mean he is the absolute worst roommate I could ever even had. This happened around 2016, about 8 years ago. I was 25 at the time, now 33 years old. I will give you a brief backstory what eventually led up to this. At the time, I was living with a close friend of mine, but he was planning to move out since he was going to move in with his girlfriend. So after he moved out, I had a bit of a hard time with the rent. Since me and my old roommate, my friend, we were splitting the rent together. And I was actually asking around on any of my friends was looking to have a roommate. Sadly, there were no one. But one of my friends suggested I could look for a roommate online, perhaps on Facebook Marketplace. I was like, why not? I will give it a try. So after about maybe a couple of days, I managed to find a response to a guy named Carlos. He was 25 years old and he was looking for a place to live. So I contacted him and he came over to just look up at the place first, made his choice to live there or not. If I had known what kind of person he was, I would not have let this place out to him. But he was very polite, very kind, very joke about guy. I mean, he could make really good jokes. So after he looked around and he said that the place looked good and um, and the rent was decent enough, he was okay to pay split the rent and all that together. So we signed a contract for him to move in with the next week. And when he moved in, he didn't have much stuff with him, maybe just a suitcase with some clothes and all that. And for the first things, I needed to make a rule for him. Like, always to pay the rent on time. If there's a day late, I will understand, but only make sure that happened, and he agreed. And if he had any friends over, just to let me know, so that they wouldn't happen to be a mess or anything. And well, from that day on, it did actually follow the rules almost to the T. But there were a few times when he had friends over, he forgot to mention it to me though. But it wasn't like any big problem. They were just watching some TV together, like watching a game or play games together, like on their or something like that. So I was not much a problem with it. At the time, I was actually dating a girl named Vicky. Now she's my wife. She was actually not living with me. In fact, I had to admit I was considering to ask her if she would move in, but I never actually approached the idea. If I had, I would have been spared for this absolute nightmare of a roommate I would had. Carlos was working, of course. He was working in the near of a close Walmart. I was working at the local, um, how to say, grocery store. And it was actually well paid for us, both of us. But the problem didn't start until like way much later, maybe after 2 months. So for the first 2 months, he was the absolute good roommate. We barely even argued or anything. If there were any argue, they were just small ones. And he did meet Vicky from time to time, and he told me I hit the home run on her. Well, I agreed. I mean, she was so beautiful and still is. And but about after 2 months, I started to notice was some changes in his behavior. Like if I asked him if he had paid the rent, he was snapping at me, but I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I was just only ask if you have paid your part of the rent. That's it. And he still snapped at me like, yes, I have paid the rent already. Don't nag at me. I wasn't even nagging. I will only ask him if he had. And he has always paid in time. And another time when I asked him um, if he had seen uh, my keys for the door, it's like, no, what I don't have to keep track on your things. I was really surprised that any of that happened. But one of the things that eventually led me to think I made the worst mistake. One day, when I get home from work, I found that Carlos was home. It was his day off, and he had invited, I think it was four of his friends, and all of them were smoking. And I'm not saying cigarettes or cigars. They were smoking weed. This was one of the things I would not tolerate. Another thing is the landlord would not have it tolerated either, because he had literally a non-drug policy in the apartment buildings. I told him that, and he just snapped at me and was like, quote unquote, mind your own business. If I want to have some weed to smoke, it's my business, not yours. I told him kindly that the landlord did not tolerate this. But his friends just told me, as long as he doesn't know and doesn't smell it, that's fine. As long as you don't tell him, it's fine, right? It was like they threatening me not to inform the landlord. But it was only a matter of time before he could find out about it, I told them. But they just ignored me and continued to watch TV while smoking the weed and other stuff. That evening, when I was over to Vicky's place, I told her. She was concerned because she knows that people that usually smokes or drinks at the same time can be unpredictable. It only mattered of time before something worse could happen. Well, if she had known, I would have listened to her. Because only a couple of days later, I came home, the whole place was completely wrecked. Like the living room was just trash all over the place. I cleaned it up. As soon as Carlos came home, I told him. And he this time was actually at least in good mood and apologized. He and his friends had a little bit of a bad time, so he apologized to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But it didn't. In fact, well, that part was never happened again, but one thing I did start to notice. It happened that he didn't pay his part of rent in time. And even the landlord came to me and asked where there's the other half of the rent. I was like, he hasn't even paid it yet? And the landlord said no. So I paid for my part and his part as well. And this wasn't the first or the second time it happened. It started to happen almost frequent, oftenly. And I was like, I really had to talk with him. And I did. And he promised that he would pay it next time. But that was not the truth. Because the next time it happened, I had to pay for him again. But this time, I noticed I was short of cash. But the fact is, I knew that I had withdrawn some money, and I know for the fact there was at least a few $100s in my wallet. But when I looked to pay his part, it was only like 300. It was at least 800 in my wallet. So he had to take 500. And I confronted him when he came back home. I just told him, did you take money from my wallet? He denied. I know for a fact I had 800 and I had 300 and I had to withdraw some more in order to pay for your rent. I paid my part of my rent already. He tried to convince me that, but I know for a fact he lied. But I know for a fact I shouldn't push it even further, so I just brushed it off and told him, next time if you don't pay the rent, I won't. Fine. But he didn't pay it, and the landlord told me to tell him. I told him, well, did you pay for it? You told me that you were. I told him no, and I'm not going to pay for his part of rent ever again. It is part of it to do it. If he doesn't do it, he will have to move out. I don't have the right, I don't have the obligation to pay for his part of rent. And he said, I thought you were supposed to do that. I was so dumbfounded of this. So I just told him no. Then he left but angrily. I had enough. I couldn't stand anymore. If he was continued to do this, because even after that day, he started smoking a lot more weed almost every single day. And I did start to notice more of my money started getting waste or vanish. I know it was him, but it was pointless to even to argue with him. He would deny it. And I started to notice some of my belongings was also starting missing. There was just a few smaller items, like a pair of shoes that I hadn't even used in a while, and part of some clothes and all that. And I later found out that he sold them in order to get money for his weed addiction. I had enough. So, while he was away somewhere, I don't even know where, and I don't even care, I just packed some of my one of my final belongings I had, like packed some of the things, and went over to Vicky's place and placed them there. And I went back to the apartment, and I literally, with help some friends and family, we moved out some of my other belongings, like my bed, my dresser, that's all I had. I left behind a TV for him to keep for his old model since I didn't have much for use of it. And why was I doing this? Well, I decided to move in with Vicky. She had asked me if I would live with her instead because, based on what had been happening, well, I don't blame her. I was losing my mind. I couldn't keep doing this. He's stealing my money in order to get more weed or other stuff that I don't even know what he was doing with. So, and I didn't have much personal belonging left anymore otherwise that he could just take and sell for money. So, I also, during this process, only a couple of days before, I told the landlord that I had enough. I'm moving out. And he would make a perfect understanding about this. Since this was a lease that was paid month by month, monthly. So I only paid my part of rent. So after I get finished my things, I put some of my other belongings at my parents' house, which eventually I sold them. But I moved in with Ricky that day. She was happy that we now roommates. We were now as officially the couple live together. That same evening, or at least late afternoon, I get a call from Carlos. He was freaking out. He's like, "Have you been robbed?" I was like calmly, "What do you mean? All your stuff are gone. Did you somehow rob us?" "Oh, Dad, no. Actually, I moved out." He said, "Wait, what? You didn't tell me. Please, come back. You're my roommate. Who else is gonna pay for the bills or the rent?" "I'm not. I only told the landlord I move out. You had to pay for the rents and otherwise. I don't have any obligations to that anymore, and I had not to call." But for the next several days, he continued to text me, call me, begging me to move back in to be in his roommate. But at first he was like very almost crying and begging, but then he was threatening me to almost like, "If you don't come back, I will drag you back here. You had the right, no right to do this. You have to this. You have the obligation to pay my rent as well. This was part of the agreement." I was like, "No, we signed a contract with the landlord for being like assignment, like a part of agreement that you had to pay part of your rent as well. If you don't believe me, go ask the landlord himself." But he refused. I later learned from another a mutual friend of us that Carlos was really struggling, and he actually had invited some of his friends to come over, but they eventually left almost immediately because he was doing the same thing. And I later learned that he wasn't just doing weed, he was even doing heroin or cocaine or something like that, those big, heavy stuff. That almost was the money he took to went to spend on. And in fact, every time when he get his payment for paycheck from his work, most of the actually goes to drugs at him almost immediately. But now that he fact that he had to pay the rent altogether, most of the money goes to the rent, and he had basically almost nothing to for his addiction. He started borrowing money all over the place from his friends, his family, but eventually, when he asked for more and more, they stopped doing it. They demanded him first to pay back what he borrowed. Then he could borrow some more. But without having most of the money that goes to the rent, he's barely have anything to pay them back. And he started begging me to come back to be his roommate once more. But I said firmly, no, Carlos, it's no way for us to do that. If you would even have done this in the first place, I wouldn't mind to be your roommate some more. But when you start doing drugs like that behind my back, and even stop lying and stealing from me, you stole some money from me and some of my belongings from your part of addiction. You need help. Not help from me, but you need to go to rehab or something. Ask your family for help. I'm not part of your family, and I'm not even your friend anymore, so please don't contact me. And I just hang up to block the number. I was really stunned of what happened. I was only saying, like, I said to Vicky, like, I would not be in the surprise that within 6 months or so that he would be kicked out. And that he perhaps went and ended up behind bars or for something I don't even know. And boy, was I right, because within the next 4 months, I was told from a mutual friend that Carlos was in fact evicted from the apartment. The landlord was so furious that he never paid on the rent in time. When he found out that he was smoking weed and doing it cocaine or whatever he did in the apartment, and that he also ruined almost things like the smell so badly, I was like, not surprised on that. I mean, he really went downhill when doing those things. So he was evicted. And he tried to beg for his friends to sleep at their place, like sleep on the couch. Only a few did allow it, but not for long, until they kicked him out as well. Because he started doing the same thing, stealing from them. But his family had enough. When he went to see them beg for help, they refused. They said, we don't want to have nothing to do with you. You're not our son anymore. So he was like disowned from his own family. I was not surprised. And somehow he managed to figure out where I was living at the time with Vicky. But the funny thing is, even when he went there, the apartment was empty because me and Vicky had actually moved out by that point. We actually moved to our house, which we are still living in with our family. Yeah, we have actually kids by now this time. But yeah, he demanded to know where I was living, but I had informed every single of our friends, even mutual friends, and to his family, just in case. If he will come back to beg for my location, don't ever give it out. And they never did. Good thing for that too. And the last thing I heard from some of his former friends, is that they saw him on the news. I was like, what? On the news? So I looked it up. Sure enough, Carlos was arrested. He tried to rob a gas station for some money so that he could buy his certain drugs for his addiction. I was like, well, not surprising considering what he did in the past, so I wouldn't. It's only a matter of time before he'd do anything like this. So, Carlos ended up behind bars for at least about almost, I think it was 2 years. But even if he came out, I don't know what happened. I think at least, I think that's one of his former friends and even one of my mutual friends actually saw him on the street like a homeless man, begging for money for food or anything, or even saw him at a homeless shelter. I mean, in the beginning, but even before he started doing these drugs, he was really a very funny guy. He was very outgoing, had no problem with. But as soon as he started doing the weed and other small stuff like that, it only messed around with his mind and his body, and also further down the addiction. He went downhill the path of the addiction. And I don't say this. Addiction is not easy to break. I was willing to consider to help him with this when it was early on. If I may have helped him earlier on, this might have not have happened. But it's just my own prediction. I mean, it's possible that even if I did help him, it's possible that he would eventually fall back to his addiction and, well, so yeah, I really hope that he may have found some good help for his life. Because I don't want the worst for him. I want him to find help to redeem himself for what he was doing and realize what he did was the wrong mistake. I know for a fact addiction to drugs can really destroy someone's life. But there are in fact a lot of people who had suffered from this type of addiction have managed to pull through and would manage to rebuild their life again. But Carlos, well, at the time, he didn't seem to that he wasn't willing to do anything like it. So I was worried about him. Last time I saw him, that was about maybe shortly before my son was born. And I saw him on the street, and he looked very like a still homeless. I saw him from a distance, but he didn't see me. Well, I mean, I was considering him as a close friend when we were living together, but after all that, I don't know what to do. I mean, I started getting worried about him in the first place. Having him start stealing my belongings and some of my money, I was really surprised that it happened. If he had confessed in from the beginning and admitted he had a problem, I would have helped him right away. But he considered drugs was more important than friendship and all that, apparently. And I don't even know if that's true or not. I mean, I hadn't even seen or even heard about him for a long time now. So I don't even know if he's even still living on the streets or if he's even had made recovered from his mistakes in the past or if he's even dead or not. I don't even know. I mean, sometimes when I wondered, I have looked around in those places I did see him, but nothing. So, to Carlos, if you're still out there hoping that you have made a full recovery and realize your mistake and that you're had, well, a much better life now that you have put your drug addiction behind you. I can't believe how that kind of things ruined your life. I wish that I could have done something earlier on, but it's hard to do that. When you try to accuse me for not being your friend, but when you start to take advantage of everyone else in your life, like your family and other close friends, it's understandable that how you could not be like that. If you had accepted my help, if you had realized your mistake, maybe then everyone else would have accepted back you in your life. Maybe your family would still be there for you. But Carlos, wherever you are, I hope you're okay. Thank you for listening.